Welcome. This presentation will describe some findings of the recently completed AMMIE project, a project that systematically monitored commercial promotion of alcohol in 5 European countries. The AMMIE project has many components, but in this presentation, emphasis is put on the evaluation of self-regulation codes of alcohol advertising and promotion in European countries. Similar results are presented to representatives of European Ministries of Health and the European Alcohol and Health Forum in April of 2012. Before we start, here's a bit more information about the AMMIE project. The AMMIE project stands for Alcohol Marketing Monitoring in Europe and ran between 2009 and 2011. The results are disseminated in 2012. The project is co-funded by DG Sanco of the European Commission and supported by EUCAM, the European Centre for Monitoring Alcohol Marketing. It reflects a comprehensive independent monitoring exercise of 5 European health NGOs from Denmark, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy and Bulgaria. The method to monitor alcohol marketing systematically was developed by the Dutch Institute for Alcohol Policy, which for several years now has experience in monitoring alcohol marketing in the Netherlands. This institute has also coordinated the project. The aim of this comprehensive monitoring exercise was to test the adherence to and effectiveness of national alcohol marketing regulations, both self-regulation codes as well as legislation. We focused particularly on trends in alcohol marketing, sports sponsorship, functioning of the complaint system, and the volume and exposure to televised alcohol commercials. The project resulted in different country reports, describing the findings of all these topics separately. We also compiled a European report on the complaint system and finally a European summary report. The findings presented in this presentation can also be found in this European summary report and are also available on the EUCAM website. First, a little background on the study. Why should we even bother? The effect of alcohol advertising and marketing on the alcohol use of young people has been studied more extensively over the past few years. Convincing evidence has been found of a causal relationship between the exposure to alcohol marketing practices and the drinking behavior of young people. Consequently, the science group of the Alcohol and Health Forum concluded in 2010, it can be concluded from the studies reviewed that alcohol marketing increases the likelihood that adolescents will start to use alcohol and to drink more if they are already using alcohol. So, volume does matter. There are a variety of both content and volume restrictions in alcohol marketing regulations that aim to protect young people against the harmful effects of alcohol advertisements that can be found in and outside of Europe. If you are interested in content restrictions, we would like to invite you to take a look at the other reports of AMMIE. In this presentation, we focus on the different kinds of volume restrictions, of which proportional standards are the first kind. Proportional standards are, as far as we know, always embedded in self-regulation codes, which means they are voluntary rules made by the alcohol or advertising sector. The official aim is set to protect young people against overexposure. In most self-regulation codes, at the company, national or pan-national level, it dictates that 70% of the audience of their alcohol advertisements should be older than the age of 18. In other words, no more than 30% of the audience reach should consist of minors. Current regulations in the AMMIE countries that include proportional standards are the Dutch self-regulation code that has a 25 instead of a 30% threshold, which means that no more than 1 out of 4 viewers of a program in which alcohol advertisements take place can be a minor. More recently, a 30% threshold was introduced in Bulgaria and Denmark. The national self-regulation codes in Germany and Italy do not have a proportional standard. However, some of the alcohol producers active in Germany have also agreed upon a similar 30% threshold within an advertising code of the Brewers of Europe and the European Forum for Responsible Drinking. And more recently, in April of 2012, the worldwide largest alcohol producers have released the news that they have agreed upon a proportional standard with a 30% threshold which will come into effect in 2015. Another way to regulate the volume of alcohol marketing is what is called a watershed or time ban. In the countries that were researched, there are different watersheds in place. Bulgaria has a time ban that restricts direct alcohol advertising, but also sponsorship of TV programs by alcohol brands or commercials till 10 p.m. In Denmark and Germany, no watershed is in place. In Italy, there is a restriction to broadcast alcohol commercials between 4 and 7 p.m., but sponsorship of TV programs is still allowed. In the Netherlands, no alcohol advertisements are allowed to be broadcasted between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. But, like in Italy, alcohol sponsorship is still allowed during the whole day. All of these time bans are embedded in law. Another type of volume restriction are product bans. Of the countries that participated in our study, Bulgaria has a product ban which says that spirits are not allowed to be advertised on television. A final and most comprehensive restriction of alcohol marketing is an alcohol advertising ban that restricts all types of alcohol advertising on television. In none of the AMMIE countries such a ban is in place, but it can be found in other European countries such as France, Sweden and Norway. In this presentation we will focus on the adherence to and effectiveness of the first two types of volume restrictions: the proportional standards in self-regulation and the watershed embedded in legislation. In the AMMIE project, the volume of exposure of young people to alcohol advertising on television was evaluated in the countries Bulgaria, Denmark, Germany, Italy and the Netherlands. From all of these countries, exposure data was delivered by Nielsen Media. Due to the costly nature of the data was restricted to data from the three most popular television channels among young people in a period of 2 months, namely May and October of 2010. Earlier estimations from the Netherlands indicate that taking these 2 months gives a reliable estimation of the average exposure of a whole year. However, it should be taken into account that we can only say something about these 2 months. Also, the restriction of just 3 channels gives us an underestimation of the total exposure of alcohol advertisements on TV. The analysis performed in all AMMIE countries followed a specially developed protocol, and all analysis and results were reviewed by the Dutch Institute for Alcohol Policy and the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School for Public Health in the US. Having gotten all the background information out of the way, let's get into our findings, starting with an example of an Italian alcohol advertisement we found during our monitoring exercise. In the 2 months of our monitoring, quite a lot of alcohol commercials were broadcasted on the 3 most popular channels. A total of 11,122 alcohol commercials were registered, ranging from 1,573 in the Netherlands to 3,321 in Germany. A minor peak in the volume of alcohol advertisements was found around lunchtime, when permitted, and a high peak was found between 8 p.m. and 1 a.m. In all countries, most of the commercials we found were for beer, except in Denmark, where most were for spirits. The total number of exposure among minors differed between countries, ranging from 10 million times in Denmark to 610 million times in Germany, with a total of 970 million in all 5 countries. In other words, 70 million times in May and October of 2010, a minor has seen an alcohol ad, which is on average 44 ads per minor in May and October of 2010, and take into account that this is an underestimation of the total volume of TV exposure because we only analyzed data of 3 TV channels per country. So let's have a closer look at the exposure figures. This table compares the exposure of the at-risk group to those of adults. The at-risk group is comprised of 13 to 17-year-olds in the Netherlands and 12 to 17-year-olds in other countries. By calculation of GRPs, or gross rating points, the size of different age groups has been taken into account. Let us take Germany as an example to explain the figures in this table. We see that the GRP of the at-risk group compared to adults of all countries is below 1, and for Germany this is 0.92. A GRP of 0.92, like all GRPs below 1, indicates that youngsters in the at-risk group are not exposed to more alcohol advertisements compared to adults. Taken into account the size of both groups, 0.92 indicates that for every 10 alcohol ads seen by German adults, German adolescents aged 12 to 17 see 9 of them. And although the GRP ratios are below 1, the data in the second row shows that within the 5 AMMIE countries, approximately 22 to 42% of the 11,122 alcohol commercials are relatively overexposing youngsters in the at-risk group compared to adults. For example, in Germany, in 42.2% of all alcohol commercials broadcasted, more 13 to 17-year-olds are reached than adults, when taking the size of both groups into account. This overexposure results in higher amounts of total exposure, as is shown in the third column. In the 5 countries, the percentage of overexposure from the total exposure ranges from 37 to 67%, which means that over 1 to 2/3 of the total exposure to alcohol advertising among the at-risk group comes from overexposure to alcohol advertisements. In Germany, 2/3 of all youth exposure comes from overexposing ads. As explained before, many European alcohol producers have included a proportional standard in their regulatory codes that is meant to prevent large numbers of minors from exposure to alcohol advertising. In line with existing proportional standards, thresholds in each country are set on 30% and 25% in the Netherlands. This table shows the violations to the existing proportional standards in the self-regulation codes during the period of May and October 2010 in the 3 most popular TV channels in each country. In Germany, no violations have been found. In the other countries, several violations have been found, ranging from 10 in Italy to 427 in Denmark. Below are the number of brands mentioned that violated the code, and the TV channels that broadcasted the alcohol commercials that violated the proportional standards. So what can we say about the effectiveness of the proportional standard? Does the 30% threshold protect young people? The 30% threshold is adopted from self-regulation codes in the United States. In the US, 30% of the population is below the age of 21. In the 27 countries of the EU, nearly 18% is below the age of 18 years old, which already shows the large discrepancy between the 30% threshold and the demographics in Europe. So when taking into account that especially the at-risk group should be protected, let's say ages 13 to 17, and little children are not even taken into account, only a proportional standard of 5.5% would be truly protective. The 30% threshold allows exposure of an audience of which 30% is underaged, which per definition enables overexposing to minors and especially the at-risk group of 13 to 17-year-olds. Let's have a look at some illustrations from the Netherlands, but similar examples have been found in the other countries as well and have been described in the country reports. The first four examples show violations of the 25% threshold that is in place in the Netherlands. For example, the television series Heroes, which was watched by a majority of minors. 76% was exposed to the alcohol commercials from Jills by Heineken, and 53% were exposed to the following commercial for Havana Club, which is partly owned by Pernod Ricard. Although minors have been overexposed, the absolute number of minors is small. Although minors have been exposed, the absolute number of minors is small, no more than 10,000 youth have seen the alcohol advertisement. In contrast, around the commercial break of the family-oriented game show I Love Holland, a commercial of Heineken beer was broadcasted. Minors constituted only 15% of the total audience watching the show and did not violate the proportional standard that is in place. However, the absolute number of minors, aged 6 to 17, was enormous. More than 362,000 minors were exposed to this Heineken commercial. So in practice you see that programs that attract families or large populations, such as important games at football championships, can reach an enormous amount of minors without violating the proportional standard embedded in self-regulation codes. So we can conclude that proportional standards should prevent youth from overexposure to alcohol ads. However, to really protect the at-risk group in Europe, the standard should be 5.5% in the EU 27. Let's take a look at the theoretical effect of lowering the proportional standard from 30% or 25% in the Netherlands to a figure that reflects the size of the at-risk group in the national population. In Bulgaria and Germany this would be 6%, in Denmark and the Netherlands 8%, in Denmark and the Netherlands 8%, and in Italy 5%. This figure shows theoretical reductions in exposure to alcohol ads of the at-risk group when applying these new proportional standards, assuming that alcohol advertisers comply with the intervention. We assume that alcohol advertisers would change their advertising patterns after the introduction of a new proportional standard to compensate for the loss of adult GRPs by this intervention. The figure shows that the new lowered proportional standard would decrease the youth exposure to televised alcohol commercials considerably, ranging from 25% in Bulgaria to 48% in Germany. So, would decreasing the proportional standard to an average of 5.5% instead of 30% be the solution then? In practice there are some important limitations. The findings in the figure assume 100% compliance of the alcohol industry. However, to monitor the adherence, monitoring is crucial and should be done by trained experts who are independent from the interests of alcohol advertising. However, data is very expensive and not always available for non-economic parties. And monitoring is always done with after-the-fact data when young people are already exposed. Also, the proportional standards are regulated by voluntary rules without an effective sanctioning system. Therefore, a full compliance with the new codes seems unrealistic and difficult to monitor. To address exposure of minors, we have to rely on other mechanisms of volume restrictions. For example, a watershed. But what is the effect of such a watershed? We have performed some simulations to examine this. The official aim of a watershed or time ban is to prevent young people from exposure to large volumes of alcohol marketing practices on television. It's easier to monitor since no audience data is required. However, in practice we see that the alcohol industry is reactive. A case study from the Netherlands shows the following. In 2009 and 2010, a time ban prohibiting alcohol advertising being broadcasted from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. was introduced. After the introduction of the time ban, we have seen a massive increase of alcohol advertisements being advertised after 9 p.m. Between 2007 and 2010, the number of alcohol ads broadcasted after 9 p.m. has tripled. This resulted in a total increase of adult exposure to alcohol ads with 57%, which means that after the introduction of the time ban, alcohol producers were more successful in reaching adults than before. However, this also has some serious consequences for the at-risk age group, aged 12 to 17. In the same period, their exposure increased with 62%, which is over 4% higher than the growth in adult exposure. The only group that benefited from the time ban relatively to the adults were the children. Their exposure grew by 5.4%, which was considerably lower than the growth in exposure in the adult group. We have simulated the expected effects of different scenarios of watersheds in the AMMIE countries. We have examined the shifts in gross rating points after introducing a time ban in each country. We assumed that the alcohol industry would be reactive, as they were in the Netherlands, and would make up for the loss in adult GRPs. Different versions of time restrictions were simulated in each country. This figure shows the relative reduction or increase in youth exposure to alcohol commercials on TV with different time slots after compensating for the loss in adult GRPs. We can see that in Bulgaria, all scenarios of time slots will negatively affect youth exposure to alcohol ads on TV. When alcohol producers will make up for the loss in GRPs of alcohol advertising exposure during the day and earlier in the evening, they will increase the number of ads later at night. At these times, relatively more youngsters in the at-risk age will watch TV, which results in the unexpected consequence that after introducing a more stringent time slot, youngsters will be more exposed to alcohol advertisements. In the other countries, we can see that shifting the time slot to later hours can reduce youth exposure, but only to a limited amount, up to 30% with a time slot till 1 AM. So what can we conclude? Firstly, that current volume restrictions in self-regulation codes are ineffective. Data shows that a 30 or 25% watershed does not protect young people from overexposure in relation to the size of their age group. Also, it does not protect large volumes of young people from being exposed to alcohol advertisements. Yet a more stringent proportional standard, for example 8% in Denmark and the Netherlands, will have important practical limitations. Reasons mentioned are the importance of independent monitoring, the lack of data, and the after-the-fact monitoring and the lack of effective sanctions. Watersheds are easier to implement and to enforce. But the alcohol industry and advertising sector are reactive and change their advertising strategy when being confronted with volume restrictions. The case study of the Netherlands and the different simulated scenarios show that in the end, a watershed can result in even more exposure to the vulnerable age group due to the shifts in placements of alcohol advertisements. It seems that the overall restriction of alcohol commercials on television is the only way to protect young people from being exposed to large volumes of alcohol commercials on television. This is the end of this presentation. For more info, visit www.ucam.info/AMMIE or email ucam@ucam.info.